126. Between 1998 and 2023, the United States experienced exactly 126 mass shootings where 4 more people lost their lives. It's a staggering number, right? One that alters countless lives and, tragically, has kind of become completely normalized in our daily news cycle. To really grasp that, let's look at some peer nations. That 126, it's literally 5 times the total number of mass shootings in Britain, Canada, Germany, France, and Italy combined. Think about that. These are places with a similar total population to the US, but their combined total is just a fraction of America's. And it leads us to this devastating, absolute gut punch of a data point. Firearms are now the #1 cause of death for American kids and teens ages 1 to 19. So we're diving right in today. In this explainer, we're putting all the politics completely aside. We're just going to look objectively at the clinical data, what researchers, public health officials, and global statistics actually tell us about why the US experiences more gun violence than literally any other developed nation on Earth. Section 1. The uniquely American crisis and the numbers that define it. To understand this, we've got to look at the raw data. And the scale here is massive. In 2023 alone, over 45,000 Americans died from gun-related causes. To put that into perspective, the Commonwealth Fund, a major health research organization, found that the US ranks at the 93rd percentile globally for overall firearm mortality. That means almost no one else is higher, and the few countries that are, they're almost all experiencing active, severe conflict or extreme instability. Among wealthy, stable peer nations, America just stands entirely alone. The gap here is just wild. Look at places like Germany, France, Australia, or Japan. Their gun mortality rates sit at or even below 1 per 100,000 people. The US hits at 4 per 100,000. And if we zoom in on just the gun homicide rate and adjust for population, the US rate is a mind-boggling 450 times higher than Britain's. 450! Okay, Section 2, guns versus culture. The simple and complex answers. How do we explain this massive gap? Well, researchers tell us we have to look at the root causes. The simple answer is sheer volume. The US has less than 5% of the global population, but it holds 46% of the world's civilian-owned guns. That works out to about 120 guns for every 100 people. There are, quite literally, more firearms than people in America, and researchers have repeatedly confirmed that this simple metric, just the absolute number of guns, correlates directly with higher rates of gun homicides, suicides, and mass shootings. But that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? Why America? Because volume alone isn't the whole story. If you've been following this debate, you've probably heard people bring up Switzerland. They have high gun ownership, but incredibly low gun violence. For a long time, that's been the go-to example to argue that the physical presence of guns isn't the core issue. Well, a 2024 academic study in the journal Aggression and Violent Behavior actually tackled this exact comparison head-on. They found that in Switzerland, guns are strictly regulated tools, heavily tied to communal national service and sports shooting. But American gun culture, it's entirely different. The study identified 3 uniquely American drivers: guns acting as symbols of individual empowerment, deep-seated societal challenges around masculinity, and severe economic deprivation across large segments of the population. And compounding all of that cultural complexity is something researchers call the contagion effect. It's basically a phenomenon where these mass shootings get embedded in the cultural fabric. It's almost like a virus. One incident inspires the next, scripting the style and substance of the violence. With 24-hour news and social media, shooters are increasingly driven by hate and a twisted desire for fame. Because of this uniquely American contagion, 7 of the 10 deadliest mass shootings in modern history happened just between 2012 and 2022. Moving on to Section 3, where the violence happens. Geography and demographics. Let's look closely at where these tragedies actually take place and who is committing them. Now, this data completely subverts what you might expect from watching the nightly news. School shootings rightfully dominate the headlines, but K-12 schools actually account for just 7% of mass public shootings. Half of them, a full 50%, happen right where Americans work and shop. 30% are in workplaces, and 20% in retail and commercial sites. And here's a really chilling detail. 44% of mass shooters are what experts call insiders, meaning they're current or former employees, students, or regular customers of the exact places they target. Geography also heavily dictates the type of violence. The Children's Hospital of Philadelphia found something fascinating. Firearm mortality rates for young people are actually identical in big cities and small rural counties. The difference is just the weapon and the intent. Urban violence mostly involves handguns and leads to homicides. Rural violence leans toward long guns and rifles, resulting mostly in suicides and accidental deaths. But the tragedy itself, identical. Across all these geographies, 32 kids and teens are injured, and 7 are killed by gunfire every single day in America.
Section 4. Calculating the human cost. Beyond the numbers. In 2024, the U.S. Surgeon General took a massive step and officially declared firearm violence a public health crisis. Let's break down the clinical, financial toll of this crisis for a second. In 2022 alone, the estimated cost to the U.S. economy was $557 billion. That's over $500 billion. Breaking it down, that is $274,000 per victim killed, $25,000 per injured patient, and it costs every single taxpayer $1,700 every year. Experts say framing this as a society-wide health epidemic rather than just a criminal justice issue is absolutely crucial, especially when the Surgeon General points out a much darker reality. Over half of all U.S. adults have now either experienced gun-related violence themselves or have a family member who has. We also have to acknowledge who is bearing the brunt of this. The racial impact is deeply disproportionate. Black Americans are 12 times more likely to be killed by gun violence than white Americans. Hispanic and Latino Americans, twice as likely. Native American and Alaska Native populations also experience disproportionately high rates. And researchers are very clear about this, it's not random. It directly reflects decades of systemic inequality, disinvestment, and concentrated poverty, which act as massive drivers for this violence. Section 5. Evidence-based solutions. The path forward. Because public health experts are unanimous on this point, despair is just not an option. The researchers point to 4 clinical, evidence-based interventions that actually show promise. First, comprehensive background checks for all transactions. Second, safe storage laws to keep guns out of the hands of kids and unauthorized users. Third, banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines to limit the sheer severity of these incidents. And fourth, funding the research. In fact, in 2025, Congress introduced the National Gun Violence Research Act to finally coordinate prevention research, while community-based intervention programs are already showing real success in interrupting cycles of violence at the local level. So, to summarize the core finding of all this data, look, in every country on Earth, people get angry, they get depressed, they feel alienated, and unfortunately, they get radicalized. But only in America do those same people have immediate access to 120 guns per 100 people. The US has effectively chosen a level of firearm access that transforms these universal human struggles into tens of thousands of entirely preventable deaths every single year. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought from the source material to chew on. The question isn't whether America has a gun violence problem. I mean, the data overwhelmingly proves that it does. The true question is whether Americans have the will to solve it.